Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the glowing heart of a Viking forge where iron sings, fire breathes, and blacksmiths swap stories louder than their hammer strikes. You're not here to fight or feast or set sail. You're here for something slower, warmer, and far smokier. The company of men who shape the weapons others raise in battle. As you push open the creaking wooden door, the smell hits first charcoal, sweat, damp wool, and something faintly metallic, like hot blood on coins. Inside, the fire glows orange-red, pulsing like the forge has a heartbeat. Sparks drift lazily through the air, landing unnoticed on broad shoulders and thick beards. You probably won't survive this, by the way. It's insanely hot in here, and if the fumes don't get you, the glowing metal will. You're definitely not wearing the right shoes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're already horizontal, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step inside, careful not to trip over a wayward log or a sleeping dog curled in the corner. The forge is busy, but not chaotic. It breathes in rhythms, bellows pumping, metal clinking, voices rising and falling like the tide. One man glances up, nods, and turns back to his work. No introductions needed. In this space, you're just another warm body near the coals. The man closest to you, let's call him Kittil, is sharpening a sword with long, smooth strokes, like he's shaving whispers off the edge. His hands are massive, blackened with soot, knuckles scarred from both hammerwork and tavern disagreements. Sit, if you're not afraid of blisters. He grunts without looking. You sit. You'll probably get a blister. His whetstone rasps against the blade, a rhythm like a lullaby if you squint your ears just right. You notice the tools hanging neatly along the wall: hammers, tongs, chisels, each with a purpose and a preferred owner. This is a world with hierarchy, but not the kind that comes with titles. Here, respect is earned in burns and blisters. Behind Kittil, a younger blacksmith, probably 20 winters if that, is struggling to keep the bellows going in time. His arms tremble as he pumps, breath steaming in the cold air that leaks through the roof. Someone snorts from across the room. Eric, the forge breathes better than you do. A few others chuckle, including a big man with a braided beard that reaches his belt. That's Ove. He's got the loudest laugh and the quietest eyes. He glances at you again, as if measuring how long you'll last here. You notice they talk in fragments, short, practical exchanges. But beneath those clipped phrases are stories, waiting to be drawn out like iron from a bloom. The forge itself is built half into the earth, dug low so that the wind doesn't steal the heat. Walls are daubed with clay and soot, the roof timbered thick to hold the warmth. Some historians think these smithies doubled as homes during winter, though no one agrees whether that was voluntary or just what happened when it snowed too hard to leave. One of the smiths starts singing under his breath, a lilting, nasal melody that sounds older than the stones in the floor. It has no words, just foul sounds, maybe to soothe the metal, or maybe just to annoy Eric. You lean back a bit and take it all in. This isn't just a place to make weapons, it's a place to listen, to learn, to pass down stories as much as to pass down steel. Historians still argue whether Viking blacksmiths were considered sacred or just skilled laborers, but standing here, you can see the reverence in every practiced move. Don't stare too long, Kittil mutters. You blink at the fire, he adds. It starts to look back. You look away, just in case. The sounds continue: whetting, clanking, low torque, boots shuffling over straw. Occasionally, the fire flares, casting brief halos around the men. It's hypnotic, like watching someone embroider with flame. Another smith comes in from the outside, shaking of sleet. The cow's out again, he announces. Nobody looks up. Not mine, someone says. Mine's already stew, says Ove, grinning. Your stew, Eric mutters. Laughter again, and the rhythm resets. You start to notice that most of the talk isn't about forging at all. It's gossip, petty and rich. Whispers about a fisherman's wife, debates over whose dog stole the smoked fish, complaints about someone moving the good hammers. The kind of ordinary chatter that keeps you from going mad when you're elbow deep in hot iron all day. But beneath it all is a slow current of deeper things: worry about the coming snow, about taxes, about raids from people who look suspiciously like them. No one says it outright, but you hear it in the pauses between laughter, The forge is where men come to make things that last, but also to survive the moments that don't. And as the night deepens and the fire burns lower, someone mutters, half to himself, "Wish I could hammer time like I do iron. Bend it back when I mess it up." Nobody answers, but everyone hears. The sword is nearly sharp now, sharp enough to slice through linen, maybe flesh, though no one says that part out loud. Kittle pauses to test the edge with his thumb, then with a tiny sliver of straw. It splits neatly, falling into soft halves. He grunts in approval, sets the blade on a rack beside others unfinished, some mid-process, all waiting. Each one has a story, and sometimes the blacksmiths remember which sword belonged to whom. Other times, it's just another blade, but not tonight. Tonight, the sword next to the fire pit, the one with the dark grape wrapped in shark skin and the faint rune edge at the hilt, starts a conversation no one expected. You hear about Sigurd's new wife. Ove says it like he's talking about weather, but everyone listens. Even Eric, mid-bellow, misses a pump. She's quiet, Kittle says, which in Viking gossip terms is code for either very shy or extremely dangerous. Too quiet, adds another smith. A wiry old man who hasn't looked up from the rivets he's setting into a shield boss. She didn't eat the stew at the wedding. This gets a pause. Not because stew is sacred, but because not eating it is. Suspicious. One of the younger blacksmiths, Triv, raises an eyebrow. Maybe she's just not into boiled goat. She brought the goat. The old man replies. Someone whistles low. It's not that Viking weddings were high society affairs. They were more like large chaotic barter festivals with side quests. But when someone brings the goat and then doesn't eat it, well, questions arise. And did you see her braid? Ove leans in. 3 wraps left, 2 wraps right, then twisted under. That's a seer's braid. Historians still argue whether hairstyles in Norse culture really had coded meanings, or if that's just a modern interpretation projected onto a culture that didn't write much down. But here, in the forge, everyone agrees that braid was loaded with intent. She's hiding something. Kittle says, "I'd wager my good chisel you don't have a good chisel." Eric mutters, "Exactly," Kittle replies. No risk. The laughter comes like steam escaping short, hot bursts, the kind of laugh you do when you're trying to forget how few hours of daylight are left before snow covers everything. She didn't bring any dowry tools. Another smith adds, "Not even a bone needle." Maybe she doesn't sew. Triv offers. Everyone sews, Kittle says. Even Bjorn, and he's got fingers like sausages. Bjorn, in the corner, raises a sooty hand. They are nimble sausages. The truth is, in these villages, everyone noticed everything. Who brought what to a feast, who left early, who cried. Too long during the storytelling, these were the data points that told you who might bring luck, and who might bring trouble, and Sigurd's new wife. She didn't just bring a goat. She brought silence. They say she arrived from the far coast, where the sea foam's darker and the cliffs hide caves that whistle when the moon is full. She walked into town wrapped in grey wool with sea salt still crusted on her boots, and when asked about her family, she said, simply, "They drowned." That's not even the weird part to the wedding. A knife slipped from the table. It happens all the time, and she caught it before it hit the floor. Blade first. With bare hands, the cut didn't bleed. Kittle saw it. "I swear on my forge," he says. "Not a drop. Maybe she's just thick-skinned." Eric offers weakly. "No," says Ove. "She's not right. Beautiful, but wrong." And it's the way he says it, like he's describing a painting where the eyes are too sharp, or a deer that walks toward the hunter instead of away, that makes everyone shift uncomfortably. The forge quiets for a moment, save for the ever-present wheeze of the bellows and the low crackle of coals. You realize they're not just gossiping. They're cataloguing, taking note of patterns, preparing stories to pass down in case things go wrong. That's what these fireside talks are for, of course. Not everything the blacksmiths say is prophecy or paranoia. A lot of it is nonsense. One of them swears the new wife doesn't blink. Another claims she speaks to cats in full sentences. Triv, sensing the tension, tries to lighten the mood. Well, if she's cursed, at least she married Sigurd. He's too dumb to notice. He once salted bread after it was in his mouth. It works. The tension breaks. A log pops in the fire, throwing light across the blade rack where Sigurd's wedding gift sword rests unfinished, and perhaps wisely untouched. Are we still doing that dragon engraving? Someone asks. Depends. Kittle replies. Are we making a sword or a warning sign? Another ripple of laughter. The edge softens again. You can feel the room inhale and exhale in rhythm with The flames. Someone starts humming a tune, low, and droning an old one, probably about fishing or love or both. The wedding talk drifts of like steam into the rafters, replaced by the steady rhythm of sharpening once more. Still, as you glance back at the sword marked for Sigurd, something in the light catches your eye, faint shimmer along the blade, like frost melting backwards, probably just the fire playing tricks. Probably. The sword catches the firelight again, and this time, it feels deliberate, like it wants to be noticed. Kittel doesn't look at it, but his sharpening slows just slightly. Oh follows your gaze and grunts. That one's got a name, he says. The forge falls quiet for half a second too long. You named a blade? Triv asks, eyebrows raised. Naming a sword isn't unheard of, but it's not casual either. In Viking tradition, names were given sparingly. People, ships, the occasional legendary cow, but swords, they only got names if they did something, or if they refused to stop doing something. It named itself. Kittel mutters, Ove crosses his arms, clearly enjoying this. Tell the story. No, then I'll tell it. Ove sits down on a low stool and wipes his hands on a rag that was probably white before the last 3 winters. So Kittel, 5 winters ago, was working on a commission for a warrior named Thorlak the Short. He wasn't short. He was short-tempered. That's the same thing in male armor. Ove smirks. Anyway, this blade's steel from a shipwreck. You remember that? A few heads nod. The one that washed up, with no crew. That's the one. Weird metal. Didn't spark right. Smelled like seawater and pine. Kittel smelts it anyway because that's what he does, and halfway through sharpening, he hears something. Don't. Kittel warns. A voice. Kittel groans. It wasn't a voice. It said scaled. Triv tilts his head. Scaled? As in shield? More like bard. Or song. Depends on the dialect. Ove shrugs. Or maybe it just liked the sound of the word. The older smith. The one who never looks up. Mumbles. Or maybe it didn't want to be swung. Maybe it wanted to be sung. A silence settles like dust. It's not an uncommon belief that blades can hold intention or memory. There's a fragment of old poetry that says a sword is the echo of the man who first held it. Historians still argue whether that's metaphor or just overdramatic kennings from bored poets. But the forge doesn't argue. The forge remembers. Anyway, scaled stack around. Thorlak never picked it up. Claimed it bit too eagerly. Said the hilt felt warm even in snow. Left it unpaid for. That's why it's still here propped in the corner like a sleeping dog. Half watching everything. You eye it again. The grip is darker than most. Almost black. And the fuller the groove down the middle looks like it was carved by something sharper than human tools. That sword's cursed. Triv says lightly. All swords are cursed. Kittel mutters. That's their job. But scaled isn't the only named weapon in the blacksmith's collective memory. There's frostbiter, made during a summer so hot the river boiled. There's Grintooth, which once sliced through 3 men and then disappeared for a decade. And Oliv's last, which no one speaks of unless there's mead involved. You ask whether naming a sword gives it power. More like warning, Ove replies. Like carving, do not pet on a bear. There's another clang from the forge. All, and Eric curses as he fumbles a tongue. A shower of sparks leaps upward, briefly illuminating the rafters. You catch sight of iron hooks where old armor hangs like silent ghosts. One of them has a dent right over the heart. Do you believe a sword can remember? You ask. Kittel's eyes don't leave his whetstone. Some remember, some regret, and some. That's the old smith without looking up. Just wait. That's the thing about Viking blacksmiths. They don't just shape metal, they talk to it. They listen. They might not say they believe in ghosts, but they leave offerings to keep the bellows from breaking. They might not believe in cursed blades, but they keep scaled just far enough from the fire to keep it from waking up. Triv, always the practical one, shakes his head. It's just steel. If you can't break it or bend it, it's fine. Is that why your axe squeals every time you oil it? Ove grins. That's your oil. You put berries in it. It smelled good. Laughter again. You realize this is how they keep the fear at bay, not by pretending it isn't real, but by laughing louder than the shadows whisper. And still, the forge hums. The fire glows, and Skeld remains quiet. For now, you get the sense it's not done waiting. The whetstone has found its rhythm again. Long, even strokes. There's something meditative in it. Like waves dragging pebbles across a beach. You almost forget the fire, the smoke, the sword with the name and the story nobody wants to finish. Then someone burps. Loudly. It's Eric. Of course, it's Eric by Thor's itchy armpit. Ove says, waving his hand in front of his face. What was that?
Lunch, Eric replies proudly, patting his stomach.
Flat ale. Again, groans ripple across the forge like a bad smell. You get the sense that flat ale has been
a recurring character in the forge's drama lately. We need to talk about this, Trish says, stepping away from the bellows.
That cask has been sitting open since solstice.
It's practically vinegar. It's got personality, Eric says.
Depth, like a warrior who's seen too many winters. Like a dead goat left in the sun. Kittle mutters, historians.
Still argue whether Viking ale was intentionally flat, or just consistently underwhelming.
It was often low in alcohol, brewed fast, and consumed faster, less about the buzz, more about hydration with a side of barley. But apparently, this batch tastes like it could strip rust off a helmet. Naturally, the discussion devolves. What makes the best ale? Ove begins, settling back like this is a serious academic panel. Cold spring water. Triv offers. Thick barley. Kittle says. A loyal goat. Eric adds. Everyone stops. A goat? Someone says. For stomping the mash. Eric replies, grinning.
Warms the grains. Adds soul. That's not how brewing works. Ove says. I don't see you making better ale. I don't try. Ove says. Because I have dignity. It becomes clear that none of them are experts.
But then again,
everyone in the forge seems to have an opinion about everything, especially things they don't actually do. From there, the conversation slides as it so often does from ale to fighting, because apparently, after drinking your horrible sour goat-stomped ale, the next logical step is to argue about how you should hold a sword. Low and wide, Ove says, swinging an imaginary blade with exaggerated flair.
Keeps your center grounded.
Stupid, Kittle grunts.
High guard.
Better for a first strike. Depends on the sword. Triv cuts in.
A six. Sure.
A longsword.
You'll just block your own eyes. Eric raises his hand. What about upside down? Surprise tactic. Everyone
stares. I'm just saying. Eric mutters. You never see it coming. You never see again after that. Kittle says. Because your opponent cuts your head off while you're trying to remember which way's up. You learn quickly that blacksmiths have opinions on swordplay.
Most of them don't fight anymore or never did, but they've watched enough warriors practice and enough blades return stained or broken to feel justified. One smith, Halfdan, pulls a battered sword from the rack and holds it up. This blade's been in for duels. The last man who used it tried that fancy spinning move, Eric says, perking up. Yeah.
Spun around like a dancing chicken. Took a shield to the spine.
See, Kittle mutters. This is why we don't take fighting advice from acrobats. Fighting style in Viking culture wasn't standardized.
Some fought with brute strength.
Others with speed and footwork. And some, usually the ones who died first, fought with flair. One-handed axe. Someone says, great if you don't mind losing your hand. Spear and shield.
Only if you want to look like a farmer with aspirations to swords. Now you're just showing off. They laugh, tease, argue, but underneath it is a real conversation.
They care not just about technique, but about survival.
Because every blade they make might be the difference between a warrior coming home or not at all. And they do remember which ones didn't come home. O points to a notched, chipped sword hanging near the forge entrance.
That belonged to Asmund. Came back without him.
See that curve?
Hit a shield rim.
Snapped.
Took 2 fingers with it. Kittle nods slowly.
Didn't temper the tang right. I still think about that.
Not your fault, Ove says. Doesn't matter.
It cracked under pressure. That's my work. It's a quiet moment. A reminder that behind the jokes and shouting and burping, there's weight.
These men craft tools that end lives and
sometimes fail to save them. And when the blades don't break, the memories still return. That sword.
The one with the curve. You glance at it. It seems almost ashamed. Hanging there like a wounded animal, do you think? Triv says quietly. The swords remember who they killed? No one answers. Instead, Ove cracks his neck and says,
flat ale.
It always makes you philosophical. Which is their way of not saying they think about it all the time. The conversation shifts again mercifully back to bad ale and worse decisions. Someone tries to bet on how long Eric will survive. His next batch. Eric insists he has a special yeast culture, which just means he forgot to clean the barrel. You are learning the rhythms of this place. Tease, argue, story, silence, laughter as armor, memory as fuel, everything sharp, but nothing meant
to cut except the steel. Outside, the light is starting to fade. A hush creeps through the cracks in the wall, thickening the air. The forge glows a little brighter in contrast.
And inside, the fire still breathes. You realize no one's even touched the flat ale since lunch. As the forge settles into a comfortable rhythm, you hear the telltale clink of a hammer resting on an anvil. It's a soft sound, but in this room where iron sings and fire grumbles, it stands out like a sudden silence in a crowd. Ove stretches,
His joints popping like kindling. All right, who wants a story?
Truth groans. If it's the one about the red-haired widow and the four-legged fish again, I'm leaving.
Even I hate that one. Kittil mutters, adjusting a blade in the fire. No, Ove grins. This one's new. Heard it from a sword merchant 2 moons ago.
Swore it was true. Swore it on his grandmother's grave and his favorite tooth. Just one tooth? Eric asks. It was all he had left.
The men chuckle, settle in, and even the youngest among them, the boy who mostly sweeps and fetches water, sits down cross-legged by the wall. The fire cracks once, and Ove begins. Long ago, not far from here, there was a ship called the Whales. Gift, big one, long like a serpent, carved prow, sails redder than pig's blood.
She was the pride of her village, captained by a man who'd never lost a raid or a bet. Sounds fake already, Kittil mutters, but he doesn't move. This
Captain Bringer took the ship and 40 men out west, planned to raid a monastery, maybe pick up some Irish honey bread, but halfway through the journey, the sky turned grey, then green,
then black. Someone whistles. Storm of storms, Ove says.
Wind like an angry god's sneeze. They lashed themselves to the mast. 2 days of rain so hard, it bit the tattoos of their arms. Historians still argue whether that's metaphorical. Eric State whispers, Ove nods solemnly.
On the third morning, the sea went silent. Not calm silent.
No birds,
no waves. Just flat, black glass stretching forever. That's when the first man heard it. He pauses, lets the fire fill the room with low hisses. A sound from beneath the boat.
like breathing.
Big breathing. The kind you feel in your ribs. Triv shifts uncomfortably.
You do too. One man tied a rock to a rope and dropped it down.
It never hit the bottom.
Then the ship began to move not with the wind.
It moved forward slowly, like it was being towed. Now you see where this is going. They looked over the side, and something was moving under them. Huge, pale, with eyes like moonstones and a back like wrinkled bark.
And it talked. Oh, here we go. Kittil said it was older than
the mountains, and it was tired of being alone. Wanted company. Just one soul to keep it warm in the deep silence.
The fire pops again. So what did they do?
The young boy finally asks. Bringer, says. The captain offered it a gift, a sword, straight from his side. Tossed it overboard. Said, take this.
It's kept me alive longer than I deserve. And ship drifted home. 4 days later.
Crew dazed.
Half of them mute, but alive. Ridiculous. Kittil grumbles, tossing a log on the fire. Probably. Ove admits, grinning.
But you know what's strange. What? Triv asks. The sword merchant. He
had that sword.
Said it washed up on shore last spring. Rusted but still sharp.
Called it Sorgvad and Sorrow Water. There's a pause.
And in that pause, the fire dimly flickers across the rack of half-finished blades like it's asking which one will
earn a name next. You realize something peculiar. Blacksmiths love stories about shipwrecks, and it makes sense. Shipwrecks were mysterious,
tragic,
full of things that defied explanation. You could prepare for battle, wear armor, train your swing, but you couldn't outpredict the sea.
It was a reminder that steel couldn't solve everything. Remember Gutman's cousin? Kittil says, suddenly, the one who swore a sea serpent.
Swallowed his oars.
Yeah, came back wearing seal hide and talking in riddles. Didn't he marry a swan? No, that was the other cousin. Right. The one with the teeth the stories pile on. A sword found embedded in the side of a whale.
A compass that spun wildly near a certain fjord.
A sailor who aged backwards, after falling into cold water. Every tale more unlikely than the last. But none of them dismissed outright, because in this world, especially here, in this heat and haze, truth has flexible edges. One moment, you're laughing at a talking fish.
The next, you're wondering if that strange whistle outside really was the wind. Historians still argue whether Viking sailors believed in sea monsters literally or symbolically.
But in the forge, the difference hardly matters.
If a story keeps you from sleeping through a storm, it's done its job eventually. The stories wind down. The fire pops gently.
The boy nods of where he sits.
Someone hands Eric a mug of something steaming and probably drinkable. You look around and realize this is how it's always been. Blacksmiths talk while they work, not just to pass time, but to buy time.
To melt fears into myth, and myth into metal. They sharpen blades. Yes, but they also sharpen stories. Outside, the sea is too far to hear.
But somehow, you're still listening for it.
The forge quiets for a while after our sea monster story, like the room itself is digesting it.
Outside, you hear a soft wind pick up, sliding against the timber walls.
Someone yawns. The fire sighs, then whoosh. A sudden spray of sparks
Flares up from the corner.
Eric leaps backward with a yell, both eyebrows intact, but barely.
Everyone jumps except Kittel, who doesn't even blink. Apprentice trouble, he mutters, without lifting his head. The culprit is a skinny boy with soot on his chin and panic in his eyes.
He's maybe 13, maybe younger, and he's just poured water onto a blade before removing it from the coals. Steam everywhere, sparks dancing like tiny demons. I thought it was ready. The boy stammers. You thought, did you?
Ove grumbles, helping him steady the tongs. Well,
next time, think before you light the forge on fire. The others laugh, but it's gentle, more amused than cruel. This is how it goes. You learn by ruining something. Sometimes a blade, sometimes your eyebrows. The boy's name is IVAR, and he's the 4th apprentice this year.
One left to join. A fishing crew.
One burned his hand on the bellows rod and swore off iron forever. The 3rd,
he got caught selling nails from the forge and hasn't been seen since. Ivor's different though. Curious, twitchy, yes, but attentive. And according to Kittel, he watches before he asks, an underrated skill in a world where fire doesn't.
Forgive repeat mistakes. As the steam clears. IVR gingerly picks up the blade he nearly ruined.
It's warped now, bent at the edge like a dog's tongue. He stares at it with wide, disappointed eyes. Ove grunts.
You know what that looks like.
IVAR shakes his head. My uncle's back after he tried to carry 4 barrels up a ladder. Laughter.
Even IVR smiles a little. Triv takes the blade, shows him the warp, explains how the grain of the metal realigns when quenched too hot or too early. You watch as IVR nods along, nearly filing away every word like sacred scripture. Most important thing in this forge, Ove tells him, isn't your hammer. IVR tilts his head. It's not. No, it's your shame. Everyone laughs again, but there's truth in it.
Every blacksmith has made a dozen mistakes.
The good ones remember them. The great ones teach others to avoid them. Historians still debate whether Viking apprenticeships were formalized, but in forges like this, tradition is passed down mouth to ear.
Burnt to blister, there's an old story. Kittel tells it later. Sharpening a new blade to replace the warped one about a blacksmith who was so perfect, the gods grew jealous. One day, they disguised themselves as travelers and asked him to forge a sword in one night. He agreed. He worked until dawn, and when the blade was done, it gleamed like starlight. But when he touched the edge, it whispered his name.
Just once, he
dropped dead on the spot. Why? IVO asks. Because the sword didn't want to be made. Kittel says, very matter of fact.
Some blades should stay inside the ore. Again, probably metaphor. Possibly just a way to scare apprentices into being careful.
But it lands. You watch IVR glance back at the warped sword like it might try to whisper to him too. You wonder how many near misses this forge has seen.
Not just bad blades, but brushes with disaster.
Tools dropped.
Coals flare to hot. Sparks leaping into beards. The smell of singed hair still lingers faintly in the air, like an ever-present warning. First scars the real start of your apprenticeship.
Ove says, holding up his arm.
A jagged white line runs from wrist to elbow.
Dropped a hammer when I was 10. Bounced off the anvil. Taught me about gravity and pain. Mines from a nail. Triv adds. Rusty one. I cried.
Not because it hurt, because it was embarrassing. Even Kittel lifts his hand, showing a knuckle that's swollen and crooked. Thought I could catch a blade mid-fall. Turns out, I could, just once.
Eric, not wanting to be left out, proudly shows of a long scar that runs under his jaw. Was that in a duel? The boy asks. Nope.
Bread knife. Slipped while buttering. Everyone howls. The fire kicks up again, as if in approval. You notice something subtle in the way they handle IVR.
They joke. Yes, but never mock.
They correct without cruelty. The forge can be harsh, but the people in it have learned that fire teaches enough pain on its own. Later, as the boy cleans tools and sweeps the floor, you hear him whisper to himself, repeating the steps Triv showed him, rehearsing, holding each word like it's made of iron.
You think back to your own first mistake, whatever it was. Everyone has one.
Some just smell more like burnt eyebrows than others. The day drifts toward its golden afternoon stretch. Shadows stretch long over the forge walls, and the heat takes on a lazy quality less the roaring wrath of morning, more like a contented purring.
It's the kind of lull where hands still move. Metal still sings against the whetstone, but minds wander a little further afield. Ove is grinding the edge of a freshly quenched blade.
The rasping sound is rhythmic, even hypnotic.
Triv's at the bellows, feeding the coals with steady breaths.
You've settled onto a low bench, wiping sweat from your brow with a scrap of linen that smells like charcoal and goat. Just when the silence begins to feel like it might last forever, someone mutters, "Remember Sigrid the Red?" A pause, then a low chuckle. Then, all at once, the room warms again, not from fire, but from memory. Shield maidens, Ove says, like it's both a curse and a compliment.
Too clever by half, too deadly by more than half. Eric chimes in, setting down his chisel with a clink. Sigrid broke my cousin's wrist in a training match. Didn't even blink.
Said he needed sturdier bones. You lean in instinctively.
You've heard tales of shield maidens before, but never from men who actually claim to know them.
And certainly not while sword edges shimmer red hot in the corner. Historians still argue whether shield maidens were real warriors or just legends. Kittle says from behind his anvil,
I say anyone who saw Freyd as Ilksdttir with an axe in her hand wouldn't question it. Ove nods solemnly. She once chased off a whole raiding party while 8 months pregnant. Screamed like a banshee.
bared her chest, swung a sword, taller than she was.
They ran like terrified puppies. Shriv laughs.
Maybe they just didn't want to hit a pregnant woman. Kittle shrugs.
Or maybe they didn't want to die. Then comes another story, this one about Astrid Silvertongue.
A smith's daughter who refused to marry unless her suitor bested her in combat. 4 tried. 1 lost a finger. 1 lost his nerve. 1 lost the match and fell in love anyway, which, according to Ove, was the dumbest move of all. The 4th...
No one knows, Eric says, leaning close, but his sword turned up in a...
Fjord, still in its scabbard. That's all I'll say. You glance toward Ivier, who is trying to pretend he's not completely enchanted.
His broom has frozen mid-sweep.
You're about to tease him when you realize so have you. There's something captivating about the stories. Not just the women in them, but the tone the blacksmiths use. Reverent. Not mocking. Not the way men sometimes talk when they want to prove they're stronger. These stories aren't told to diminish the women they're shared because the women were worth remembering. Sigrid the Red. Ove muses again, dragging the whetstone down the blade in long strokes. You know, she once forged a spearhead, so sharp it split a sheep's skull with a whisper.
She said if a man couldn't run faster than a pleading goat, he wasn't worth the weapon. True story, Triv adds.
She tested it on my uncle's flock. He was furious.
But he also started bragging that his goats had warrior-quality craniums. So, the fort laughs again. And the bellows is softly in the background. Like they're laughing too. Do you think any of them ever forged their own swords? Ivier asks.
It's the first time he's spoken since the eyebrow incident. Kittle gives him a long look.
Probably, but I bet they didn't call them swords. I bet they gave them names. You remember that earlier story, the cursed blade that...
Whispered.
Apparently, names have weight in this world. You wonder what kind of name Sigrid the Red might give to a sword. Blood tongue, Ove says, answering your thought without realizing it. Grief biter,
says Triv, Iron Mother. Kittle offers, almost wistfully. Chicken Helm, Eric says with a grin. The others groan in unison, not again. But Eric is undeterred.
No, listen.
What if the shield maiden was so terrifying? She wanted people to laugh, lull them into thinking she was harmless. And then bam, he slaps the anvil. Sparks jump.
Split their shin bones like firewood. You're just trying to make your...
Chicken Helm sounds strategic. Triv mutters. Still the worst Helm in the entire village. Ove adds. Ivier leans over and whispers to you, "What's the chicken Helm?" You can't answer because you're laughing too hard. And yet, amidst all the jokes, there's still a sense that these shield maidens weren't just tales. They left marks, scars, memories, maybe even children who grew up hearing bedtime stories about how their mothers outdueled raiders and scared grown men with war cries and bad tempers. The air smells like iron and sweat and something nostalgic. Like the last time someone told you a story around a fire. Outside, you hear a bird call, a raven.
Or maybe not. The forge resumes its rhythm. Hammer.
Bellows. Stone.
But something has shifted.
The laughter's softer now. Thoughtful. You can feel the echo of those women in the glow of the steel. You pick up a small blade from the table. Its edge is just beginning to curve under your thumb. Not sharp, not yet, but you wonder what name it might be given one day. The sun has dipped behind the tree line now, casting the forge into the dusky golden hour where everything glows like it's been dusted with embers. The heat of the day lingers in the stones under your boots, and the shadows deepen in the corners of the room, especially near the weapons rack. Ove reaches for a blade that's been hanging there since morning.
It's long, slightly curved, and darker than the others, almost like the metals absorbed every story told around it. You don't remember seeing it used today.
He lays it gently on the sharpening bench like it's a sleeping pet. Then he says it. This one screamed. Everyone stops. Triv freezes mid-pump at the bellows.
Kittil looks up from a chainmail patch.
Even Eric, who's been trying to reshape a dented helmet rim with all the patience of a man working a stubborn cabbage, blinks like someone just pinched him. You wait for a punchline. Nothing comes. Screamed. IVAR says. Voice somewhere between skeptical and spooked. Ove nods. Last week, I was grinding it down after a bad tempering.
Stone hit the edge, and it howled like it had lungs. You glance at the blade.
It's not singing now. It just sits there, matte and innocent, like a cat caught not doing anything wrong. Metal doesn't scream. Triv mutters, but even he sounds unsure. No. Eric says slowly, but sometimes it sings. You've heard that. The sweet whine when it hits a perfect edge. Historians still argue whether Viking smiths truly believed weapons had spirits, or if they just talked that way for fun. Kittil says, eyeing the sword like it might answer. Him back, or maybe the metal remembers. Ove says softly, like someone repeating an old proverb. How it was mined, how it was hammered, what blood it tasted, all right. Eric huffs. That's enough poetry. The blade didn't scream. The wheel probably skipped. I was there. Ove snaps. I heard it. Like a scream. Underwater.
Like it was trying not to be heard. You suddenly feel much less warm. Triv clears his throat.
Could be trapped air. Fought in the tempering.
Echo chamber in the blade.
Not screaming. No, IVR says, eyes wide. What if it's the one from that story? What story? You ask, already regretting it. The sword that was made from the iron nail of a drowned man's coffin. He says,
the one that couldn't be sheathed without drawing blood.
They say it whistled when it smelled fear. Eric looks at him like he's grown a second head.
You are not supposed to believe those tales. You are also not supposed to sharpen swords in the dark. IVR mumbles, too late. The forge's glow has shifted.
The coals are dying down. Everything feels closer, quieter, except for the sound of the sharpening stone as Ove starts grinding the blade again. You wait, and there it is, not a scream, but something. A whine so faint you think it might be your own ears ringing. But it rises slightly as he draws the stone along the edge, like breath caught in the lungs, like a kettle just before it boils. Everyone hears it. Eric mutters something that might be a prayer. Or swear. The difference is blurry out here. Maybe we should name it, Kittil suggests, voice dura as old parchment.
Give it something
to answer to, or bind it, says Triv, only half joking.
Forge a second blade and make them sleep side by side. I heard, IVR says cautiously, if you bury a sword in a moss patch under a full moon, the spirit leaves.
That's not a sword, Eric snaps. That's a cat. They all laugh, but not hard.
The laughter breaks quickly, like brittle bark,
and none of them stop watching the blade. You wonder what it takes for a blacksmith to believe a weapon
has a voice.
After all, you've seen these men burn, bend, and break iron like it's dough.
They know metal's language.
They can smell good steel like bakers smell fresh bread. If they say something screamed, well, maybe it did. You sit quietly, watching as Ove moves the blade one last time. The stone glides down the edge. No sound now, just the whisper of friction and the soft huff of bellows restarting behind you. Better?
Someone asks. Ove tilts his head.
Quieter. And that's all he says. The conversation drifts after that. But the mood doesn't fully recover. Even the jokes are thinner, like someone strummed a nerve that hasn't quite settled. A few half-hearted barks about Bjorn's chicken helm rise up, but nobody leans into them.
Everyone's glancing at the sword. You catch Triv moving it to a different spot on the rack.
Not because it's needed there, just
because you've heard blades can be named after the deeds they perform.
Maybe this one doesn't have a name yet because its story isn't finished. Or maybe it screamed not because of what it had done, but because of what it would do. For now, it sleeps again. The forge hums on, and the sound of steel returns to normal honest, comforting,
like breath drawn slow and deep. But every once in a while, you glance at the sword, just to make sure it hasn't moved out. It hasn't. Yet, the fire cracks low now, burning more amber than orange.
You've settled deeper into the rhythm of the forged metal. Breath, sweat, laughter. Silence, but something about the air tonight feels a bit off. Maybe it's just what happened with the sword. Maybe it's the smell of singed wool clinging too long. Or maybe it's the sudden flicker from the far corner where no one is standing. A puff of soot lifts out of the bellows. Triv frowns. Did you see that? No wind, says Kittil, glancing toward the chimney. Not even a breeze. I swear I closed the vent an hour ago. Eric mutters. Could be the elves. Ove says without looking up.
They get twitchy when there's moonlight and someone lies to their tools.
And just like that, you're in a completely different kind of Viking story, because, of course, Viking blacksmiths believed in forge elves. Not the cute kind with jingling boots and peppermint breath. No, these were dear, small, fierce, invisible.
Spirits tied to the land, the fire, the tools, and sometimes the blood.
Most were harmless. Some were mischievous.
And a few held grudges longer than your lifespan. You squint at the space behind the anvil.
Nothing, but the soot is still drifting lazily, like someone exhaled from the dark. Historians still argue whether the blacksmith's forge was considered sacred ground, Kittil says, scratching under his tunic, or cursed, depends on the region, Ove shrugs.
In my village, the old smith never let women into the forge.
Said the elves hated the smell of milk. That's not elf logic. Eric grumbles. That's just some man being weird about cheese. They used to leave bits of lard or grain at the corners of the workshop, Ivier says, poking around, with a long rod. Little offerings. If you didn't, the elves might steal your fire, or make your tools vanish, or crack your iron,
or curse your tongs so everything slips. Triv's mouth curls.
There's no elves. There's just bad apprentices. Tell that to my last rivet set, says Ove. Went missing last full moon. I left a scrap of pork belly on the coals, and the next morning they were back.
Neatly stacked. You blink.
You're saying they took them?
Then returned them.
Right.
They just wanted me to say please. This time, the puff of soot doesn't rise alone. Something clinks behind a barrel.
Everyone hears it, but no one moves. Could have been a rat, IVL offers. Rats don't forge nails. Ove replies. Look. He points. At first you see nothing. Then there,
in the ashes beside the forge, a tiny horseshoe.
Not full size, not even pony size. It's barely bigger than your thumbnail. Just sitting there. No one here made that. Triv mutters, his voice low now. You're not entirely sure how that thing exists.
It's too perfect to be dropped. Too clean to have been kicked up from an old pile.
And nobody remembers putting it there. Kittil leans in. You think it's a thank you. Or warning, Eric says. They debate for a minute. Should they burn it, bury it, hang it from the forge door? You, for one, decide to step a little further away from it. They say forge elves don't like loud laughter, IVL murmurs, half remembering some tale from a grandmother's lips.
Or when you sharpen knives after midnight. Guess what?
Time it is, Eric says, checking the sky with a grimace. The forge has no clock, but the moon's riding high and the air smells like it's nearly tomorrow. No one wants to be the one to put out the fire now.
No one wants to be the last to leave .so. The work continues. You help Kittil line up rivets for a chest plate.
You and IVL reheat a warped blade and whisper nervously about invisible mischief. The conversation keeps folding in on itself, quieter, more deliberate.
Everyone pretends they're not glancing at that horseshoe every few minutes. Could be.
The elves are just bored, Ove says finally, watching us sharpen the same sword over and over.
I'd be cranky too. Then maybe leave him something better to watch, Kittil says. He walks over to the workbench and draws a crude stick figure in the ash with the spike arms flung up like it's dancing.
Then another, and another. Now we've got a party, he says, or a sacrifice, Eric mutters. The laughter is lighter now, nervous, but back again, and then you hear it, just as the forge coals hiss softly under a fresh log. A tink, gentle, like a hammer on a bell, but not from any of your tools. Nobody moves. It's fine, Ove says, brushing ash off his sleeves. Means they're happy.
Or amused.
Or
mocking us. That's comforting, Triv says.
Let's assume it's mocking. Later that night, when the forge is banked and the blades are cool and the moon has started its descent, you find something tucked in the fold of your tunic, a small piece of copper,
twisted into a spiral, not yours, but very deliberately left. You turn it over once, twice. It's warm to the touch, You decide not to mention it to anyone, just in case.
The morning sun hasn't quite arrived, but the forge has been awake for a while now.
The air carries the damp, smoky smell of ash and iron and something sweet. Someone's brought stale honey cake from yesterday's market.
You sit on a creaky,
Bench beside Triv, who is sharpening a seeks with slow, deliberate strokes.
The rhythmic scrape of metal on stone is the only sound for a moment, then Ove says it, half through a mouthful of cake. Did I ever tell you about the time someone
Stole the king's tooth?
The entire forge halts. Even the embers seem to crackle differently. Which king?
Kittil asks warily. The one with the red beard, Ove replies, as if that somehow narrows it down. There are approximately 12 kings in Norse sagas described as having red beards, but no one argues. Everyone knows Ove doesn't need specifics.
To tell a story.
You lean in anyway. It happened after a feast. He begins, when the king was well into his 9th horn of mead. Some say it was a molar. Others say it was a whole gold captain's sizer he'd had made after falling face first of a horse. Historians still argue whether Norse kings ever had gold teeth. Kittil interjects, trying to sound scholarly. Ove,
Wave him off. Let me finish. So this king falls asleep in his longhouse.
deep snoring.
The kind where your spirit leaves your body out of embarrassment. And when he wakes up, his tooth is gone. Wait while he slept. You ask, oh, yes, Ove says, grinning.
Slipped right from his mouth.
No blood, no struggle, just gone.
They say the gods blamed a cursed blacksmith. Eric looks up sharply.
Why always a blacksmith?
Because we're the only ones who can melt gold without swallowing.
IVR says, smirking. The story spirals from there. One version blames a clever thrall who used a fishbone and honey to loosen the tooth. Another claims it wasn't stolen at all. The king swallowed it during a drinking contest and refused to admit it. Yet another swears the tooth became a charm passed down among travelling tinkers, and whoever wears it always wins at dice. Even the sagas hint at it, Kittil says.
There's a mention in one poem of the golden green of a fallen king. Might be metaphor.
Might be oral history. That's not history. Truth mutters. That's just a drunken dental riddle. But you can tell he's amused. They return to work. But the mood has shifted.
Now everyone is trying to remember ridiculous things they've heard about royal bodies, shaved eyebrows for luck, enchanted fingernails, the queen who believed eating raven hearts would make her immortal. You want weird,
Eric says, wiping
his hands. I once heard of a prince who kept a pet goat trained to detect poison. Smart, says IVR. Only the goat had a taste for honey wine.
So it got drunk and accused everyone. You laugh. The idea of a belligerent goat disrupting.
Caught with bleats of doom is too much. It's not just idle amusement, though.
These stories are functional. The forge is a place of fire and metal, but it's also one of repetition, of monotony, waiting, cooling, and sharpening.
So stories pass the time, and the more absurd they are, the more they stick. There's also something comforting in them. Idea that even kings lose teeth and try to cover it up. That even rulers get tricked by sleeping with their mouths open. Bet he blamed the elves. Oh sis, circling back to the previous night's mystery, or sorceress, adds Kittil.
They always show up when something goes missing. I heard of a woman who cursed a whole farm because a boar refused her porridge, IVR says.
Next spring, all the pigs had backward hooves, Triv snots.
You're all idiots, and yet, Eric says, you're sitting here listening.
To every word. That's the thing, no one really believes these tales completely.
But they don't disbelieve them either. They sit in that warm, smoky space between fact and folklore, between steel and fire, right where blacksmiths live. You help carry in some scrap iron from a wagon outside, bent tools, broken nails, even a cracked cauldron.
As you stack them, you notice someone's etched a crude drawing into the metal rim of the cauldron. A tooth.
Maybe a fishhook. But after that story, your brain insists it's a tooth. Someone thinks they're clever. You murmur. Someone is bored. Triv replies. Later, as the forge winds down for a midday meal, someone brings out a clay jug with an unmarked lid. Everyone gets nervous. Last time we drank unmarked clay. Kittil forgot how to walk for a week. Ove mutters. Just try it, says IVR. You do. It tastes like old apples and river water. Not bad. Just
confusing. What's in this?
You ask. Could be fermented pear. IVR shrugs. Could be punishment. Everyone laughs again. It's not about the tooth. It's not about the truth. It's about the ritual, the space for shared silliness between hard tasks. Be by the time the meal ends, and the coals are raked back to a low, steady heat. No one mentions the missing tooth again. but later, when you pass the rack we're finished.
Blades hang. You spot something new. One sword has a small notch in the hilt shaped almost like
A tooth. Maybe it's a joke. Maybe it's a warning. You decide not to ask. The forge is quieter now. Not silent, no Viking forge is ever truly still, but the clang of hammers has softened into the hush of carving tools and murmured conversations. Most of the big work is done for the day.
blades and calling, spears, lean against the wall like tired old soldiers, and the anvil itself seems to be exhaling. Now comes the part everyone argues about. The runes. You're perched on a low stool beside a broad wooden slab where two blacksmiths, Eric and Triv, are hunched over a nearly finished sword, their brows furrowed. Between them lies a small chisel, glinting dangerously under the firelight. Only the one who quenched it should carve the runes, Triv mutters. Not looking up, Eric snorts.
Says the man who once carved goat into a spear shaft by mistake. It was supposed to be goat. The man was from Skarsfjord.
He hunts mountain goats with a spear.
You know this. The debate continues.
You've heard versions of it a dozen times already. Who has the right to inscribe the blade? What runes should be used? Where they should go? And what exactly they're meant to do? Some say runes are nothing.
More than decoration. A flourish for noble clients who like the feel of mysticism. Others whisper that a well-placed rune, carved with intent, can shift fate itself. Historians still argue whether Viking runes were used as real magic or symbolic language. Kittel chimes in from across the forge, where he's oiling an axe handle. Ove leans in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper.
My uncle once saw a man carve a rune into his shoe.
Claimed it made him run faster. 2 days later, he tripped over a goat and broke his ankle. Lesson: don't run with goats, IVAR says solemnly.
You study the sword.
The blade is perfect shining, smooth, a clean taper.
Its edges have already drawn blood. And not just in battle.
But it doesn't feel finished.
It lacks something personal. Something that says this weapon is alive. Eric seems to agree.
It's for a young warrior, he says quietly. Just turned 16. First campaign. Wants to honor his father. Triv relents with a grunt. Fine, just don't carve anything sentimental. The last one said courage is friendship. And the Jarl laughed so hard he spat mead through his nose.
You watch Eric place the chisel. The rune he starts with is Alge's protection. It looks like an open hand or an elk's antlers. His strokes are precise, almost reverent.
Around the forge, others stop to observe. A rare moment of collective stillness.
There's something sacred about this part. Not religious exactly, but weighted like the final breath before a leap. Some believe if you carve the runes wrong, the blade turns on you. Eric says without looking up. Some believe if you carve them too well, the gods get jealous, that's IVAR.
Some believe we just like pretending we're wizards.
Triv mutters. He may have a point. After Algis comes 2HOURS, the warrior's rune, shaped like an arrow.
A good choice.
But then Eric hesitates. His hand hovers.
One more, he murmurs. The others edge closer. Even the fire seems to lean in. He carves a third rune. I was the yew tree.
Death and transformation.
Protection through sacrifice. Triv raises an eyebrow.
Bit dramatic for a 16-year-old, Eric shrugs. He lost his mother last winter. No one marks the choice after that. Someone brings over a soft cloth to wipe the blade clean.
The runes glint like scars, intentional, personal, impossible to erase. You feel their weight just looking at them, then the arguments start again. Should the runes go on the hilt instead?
Or on the tang hidden, but still present?
Should the warrior be told what they mean? Or left to discover it later? You tell them, Kittel says.
Otherwise, they'll say the wrong thing at the wrong time and summon a ghost.
Or worse, Ove mutters. A goat. Everyone groans. Outside, the light is beginning to fade. Shadows stretch across the forge floor like long fingers.
You step out for a moment to catch a breath of cooler air.
A breeze lifts the edge of your tunic and carries the faint scent of salt from the distant fjord.
A boy stands nearby, nervously watching the forge door, that your sword in there.
You ask. He nods. Skinny, pale, too much face for his bones.
But his eyes are serious. You want to know what they carved.
You ask. He hesitates. Then, only if it's good.
You smile. They carved protection, strength,
and change. He doesn't ask for more, just nods once and walks away, hands stuffed in his belt. Back inside, Eric is already working on the next blade.
This one's for a merchant who requested a rune for wealth. No one says it aloud, but they all roll their eyes. Triv mutters, might as well carve please rob me on the hilt. But he sharpens the edge anyway, because whether the runes work or not, A dull sword helps no one be by the time the forge.
Dims and the coals begin their long sigh into sleep. Another half-dozen blades are rune-marked and polished.
You can't help but wonder how many will still exist 100 years from now. How many runes will be worn away, how many meanings lost. But you also know this, somewhere in the dark. A 16-year-old boy will raise a sword that has his story etched into it.
Even if he never knows what the runes mean. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real magic. The forge feels unusually warm tonight, not from the fire, but from something in the air itself. You notice it the moment you step outside to fetch water from the nearby stream. The breeze isn't biting, the way it should be in midwinter. Instead, it carries the strange softness of spring. You dip the bucket and glance up.
No snowflakes drift down.
The ground isn't frozen solid. The stream flows like it's July. You step back inside the forge, and Eric is already complaining. Feels wrong, he mutters, wiping sweat from his brow. Too warm for this time of year.
My bones don't like it, Triv nods solemnly. Last time this happened, the sword melted. You blink. Melted? Well, softened, he corrects.
Bent like old cheese.
That sword, the one that melted, becomes the subject of the evening's storytelling. Everyone knows about it. Though no one agrees on what really happened, you settle in as the tale unfolds. It was a winter not unlike this one unnaturally. Mild.
The snow came late, the rivers didn't freeze, and the birds never quite left.
People muttered about omens.
The goats grew confused and began mating too early. Farmers worried their crops wouldn't sleep properly. And blacksmiths,
well, they complained about the iron. We were forging for a spring raid, says Kittle.
Lifting a half-finished spearhead with tongs. Same setup as always.
Good bulk iron, charcoal hot as a dragon's belly.
But the blades weren't holding.
They cooled too fast, bent under their own weight. One sword, in particular, was the pride of the forge. Double-edged, etched with clean runes. Bone hilt polish as smooth as antler.
A masterpiece.
It had taken
3 days just to shape the full of the groove down the blade, and Eric swore it would sing in battle. The day it was finished, a freak warm wind blew through. Not a breeze, not a gust. A wind, hot, dry, sudden.
It sucked the moisture from
the air and sent sparks dancing like fire spirits. The sword bent in its scabbard. Just wilted. Some say it was the fault of a cursed ingot. Others blamed a foolish apprentice who left it too near the coals. But Triv insists it was the gods, the All-Father was watching. And he laughed. Historians still argue whether Norse.
Blacksmiths attributed natural failures to divine intervention or poor technique. Kittle adds, in the same tone someone might mention the chickens are weird. You find yourself wondering how often strange weather changed the course of Viking
battles.
What happens when your iron tools rely on cold climates, and the cold refuses to show up? I heard the blacksmith in Hedeby once lost half a year's work to a warm rain, says Ove. He'd laid his swords out to cool, then it poured.
Not freezing rain, warm rain.
Blades cracked like bread crusts. It's clear that warm winters make smiths uneasy.
Their rhythms rely on predictability. Fire, metal, water, hammer. Change any one of those like, say, the temperature of your quenching, barrel, and everything feels off. That winter, many forges took a break. Too risky, they said.
Too unnatural. But some of us kept working, Eric says, with mock bravado.
Because the raids don't wait for snow. You're handed a thin, twisted piece of iron, a remnant of that infamous bent sword.
It curves like a question mark. They still buried it with the boy who commissioned it, Eric says.
Didn't have the heart to tell him. Boy died before he could use it.
Triv murmurs. Maybe it was the sword trying to warn him. That's a theory you've heard before. That swords, like animals or weather, know things. That they resist bad hands. That they fail when they're not meant to kill. The forge shifts gears as the story winds down. Tools are cleaned, coals fed, all rubbed into hilts.
But the warm air lingers, unsettling. Someone opens the back door. Outside, a fog is rising from the still unfrozen ground.
It curls into the forge like a slow sigh, wrapping around your ankles. I miss real winters. Kittle grumbles. Snow up to your knees, blades that call like they're supposed to. Cold keeps the dead quiet, adds Ove, not quite joking. There's a silence at that longer than usual. Then someone changes the subject. What do we do with this new commission? Triv asks, holding up a rough sketch. It's a long sword requested by a chieftain known for his fire obsession.
Wants a flame motif down the blade. Wants it hot. He'll get his wish. Eric mutters, wiping sweat from his collar. You help prepare the steel, folding it with care.
Every movement feels oddly sticky. the metal more pliable than it should be. It's like the heat has seeped into the iron itself, making it harder to control. Still, the smiths press on, and as the forge glows, you catch sight of the old bent sword,
hanging from a hook on the far wall, never used, never forgotten. A reminder that not every failure is a waste. Sometimes it's just history softening in strange weather. Outside, the stars are hazy behind low cloud. The wind carries the smell
of damp earth and pine needles.
And from somewhere across the village, a goat bleats into the mist like it knows something's coming.
You're halfway through wrapping the grip of a small axe when someone slams a shield down on the workbench with an offended thud. I saw it again. Kittle grumbles.
Bjorn's chicken helm. The room freezes.
Then groans ripple through.
The forge like a wave.
A few snorts.
A smothered laugh. You mean the chicken helm?
Asked Triv, dramatically wiping his hands on a soot-darkened rag. No, a new one. Kittle replies, eyes wide.
He made another.
This one's got feathers. You almost dropped the axe. Everyone knows about Bjorn's first chicken helmet. It's something of a legendary failure around here. A cautionary tale whispered to apprentices who start getting too experimental with their designs. It started innocently enough. Bjorn, a smith of middling talent, but massive ego, decided helmets
were too boring. He claimed that if warriors were meant to be feared, they should look like gods, not buckets with -holes.so. He set out to make the most memorable helmet in the region. Unfortunately, Bjorn's muse, apparently, was paltry. The
result:
a rounded iron cap with a tall, flaring crest, which he forged to resemble a rooster's comb. For flair, he inlaid red enamel up top and edge-screwed feathers into the sides.
He called it the Dawn Striker. Everyone else called it the chicken, to make matters worse. The first time it was worn in battle, it caught an arrow right in the middle of the crest. The arrow bent but didn't break, wobbling like a twitching tail feather while Bjorn kept swinging his axe. His enemies laughed so hard they stopped fighting. They say even the ravens turned around and left. Someone jokes. Historians still argue whether Viking warriors truly adorn their helms with outlandish designs, or if such claims stem
from saga exaggeration. Eric says dryly, shaping a blade edge with a whetstone. The forge descends into like chaos. Remember when it got stuck in the shield rack?
Or when it wouldn't fit through the longhouse door.
I heard it made roosters in the village crow early.
Even you can't help but smirk as the smiths relive every embarrassing detail. But it's not just laughter they're using
it as a warning.
Blacksmithing is full of unwritten rules, and one of them is this: just because you can doesn't mean you should. Triv picks up a steel band.
He asked me to help rivet and you beak onto it. Did you?
Absolutely not. I value my fingers and my dignity.
Still, the conversation shifts into a broader one about design failures and unwanted commissions.
Everyone here has made something they regret: a blade that cracked too easily, a helm that sat wrong, a spear tip that looked better than it worked. One smith sheepishly admits he once made a sword that rang like a dinner bell every time it struck anything.
Another once carved decorative wolves into an axe handle only for the client to remind him he was terrified of wolves. He was starting to realize that blacksmiths don't just work with fire and iron, they wrestle with egos.
Theirs and everyone
else's.
Some warriors want their blades to match dreams more than practicality.
And sometimes the job is to say no. Bjorn never listens, Eric mutters. He wants a legacy, not a weapon. There's a pause at that.
Because, well,
don't they all? Even as they joke. You can tell the chicken helm makes them think about the fine line between memorable and ridiculous.
Between a work of art and
a disaster in feathers. Someone finally pulls out a piece of parchment. We should sketch it.
For future generations. They gather around as a few scribbles appear. An exaggerated dome, wild crests, ridiculous plumage. It quickly turns into a full caricature. By the end, they're debating whether to add talons to the cheek guards. You can't stop laughing now.
Your ribs ache, your hands are black with soot, and your face is flushed from the forge's heat. There's something very human about the way they talk about their mistakes, not as failures, but as legends, as stories. Warnings, yes,
but also markers of growth.
Like rings in the trunk of a tree, the wind outside picks up, rattling the wooden shutters. But the forge feels warm, filled with laughter and the sharp tang of oil and hot metal. Let Bjorn make his helmets. Kittle finally says, brushing ash from his tunic.
It gives the rest of us a reason to try harder, or at least something
to talk about on quiet nights. Triv adds. You glance at the wall near the bellows, where someone has hung a bent horseshoe and a miscast spearhead. Both gleam faintly in the firelight. Useless but oddly beautiful. Maybe one day they'll add a feather there. Just one, for the sake of posterity.
You've gotten used to the rhythm now. Heat, hammer, cool, repeat. But something shifts as twilight thickens outside the forge.
The joke's slow, the clangs soften, and a kind of hush settles over the group. Not silent, but weighted, Shreve sits,
Sharpening a sword on a low bench, the rhythmic shh of the whetstone like a slow breath.
He's staring at the blade, not inspecting it. Not really, but looking through it, almost absent-minded. Then, as if picking up the thread of an invisible conversation, he murmurs, "Do you ever wonder if swords miss their owners?" A few glances dart his way. Eyebrows lift.
Nobody laughs. The question lingers in the warm air like wood smoke. You lean in slightly.
Not because you have an answer, but because you're suddenly curious too. One of the older smiths, Einar, slowly straightens his back. "That blade," he says, nodding at the one in Trev's hands, "belonged to Dad the Younger. Fell during the fur trade last spring." Trev doesn't react, he already knows. "I repaired it twice," Einar continues.
Once when the tip snapped against an Englishman's shield.
Again when it cracked from frostbite. He shrugs. "It's a good blade."
Solid spine, holds an edge. But it hasn't cut clean since he died. Trev says softly, everyone.
Goes quiet again. It sounds silly.
But also, not. You think back to how the Smiths talked about the swords earlier in the day, how they gave them names, attributed moods to the steel, even blamed warped hilts on elf mischief. It isn't superstition, exactly, it's something deeper. A way to honor the time, the breath, the sweat that goes into every single one. Some say blades carry memory, Kittel offers, eyes half-lidded.
Not just scratches and blood, but memory of the hand that swung them, of the lives they ended or saved. Historians still argue whether Viking blades were considered sacred or merely functional tools. The sagas hint at both. Some weapons were buried with their warriors, others passed from hand to hand, each owner adding a layer of history. Some smiths inscribed secret marks lines only visible when the blade met moonlight. There's this story. Someone mutters, poking at the fire. A Jarl dies.
His sword gets passed to his son, but every time the boy uses it, it pulls too.
Far left, like it's trying to dodge. Turns out, the sword was forged for the father's left hand. The son was right-handed. You smirk, expecting laughter, but no one chuckles.
The mood is too settled for that now.
The tale lands like a lullaby, gentle, sad, true in the way most forges understand truth. They start sharing more like that. One smith recalls a blade that kept turning reddish near salt water no matter how much oil they used. Another swears a dagger carved with a stag would hum faintly when polished under starlight. Not loudly, just enough. You're not sure how much to believe.
But you do believe they believe. The younger apprentice, who barely speaks most days, pipes up suddenly. If you're holding something that once knew war.
Maybe it knows fear too. No one contradicts him. You feel the weight of the sword. You've been sharpening. Its edge glints faintly, mirroring the forge's firelight. It's cold now, but it was glowing not long ago. Like a heartbeat, cooled. Trev rests the blade across his knees. "I always wonder if they know when they're done," he murmurs.
Like dogs that walk off into the woods when it's time.
It's a strange image, but somehow perfect. A few of the smiths begin to quietly pack away tools.
Not quite ending the night, but slowing it.
The whetstones are rinsed and laid aside, rags folded.
The fire fed once more, then left alone to settle.
Into coals, the silence deepens. You catch someone staring at the rack of finished weapons, rows of iron and steel, some polished, some scarred. Waiting, but for what? The answer's different for each. Some blades will be gifted, others sold.
Some might hang in a hall untouched. A few will bite through leather and bone.
A few might never see battle at all.
But each one carries something intent, at the very least.
Perhaps more. One of the men clears his throat. There was a woman once, Thyra. She asked for a blade carved with runes, only she would understand. Said she needed it not to fight, but to remember.
Her brother had fallen.
She wanted a sword shaped like his. Trev nods slowly. That's the kind of blade you bury with your hands. You're not sure whether that means you bury it deep in the ground, or hold it until your fingers go still. Either way, the forge feels different now.
Not empty, not spooky, just full.
With memory.
With ghosts, maybe. Or just the sense that everything made here carries echoes of the people who shaped it. Your own fingers trace the spine of a blade you helped finish this morning. It's smoother than it was, but not flawless. You can still feel the slight imperfection, where the metal cooled unevenly.
It's small, but it's yours, and you wonder, someday, long after you're gone, Will someone run their hand along that same line and wonder who you were?
The room breathes quietly. The swords do not answer. Night has taken full hold now, and the forge glows like an ember tucked into the bones of the earth.
The heat is lower, the rhythm slower. Even the flames lit the coals more gently, casting long orange shadows across the anvil, the whetstones, the racks of glinting steel. Most of the smiths are winding down for the evening. Some stretch sore backs, others sip from clay mugs. But Truth's still working. Slowly, patiently, he sharpens one final blade, long and slender, with a subtle pattern like flowing water in the steel. You sit beside him, not to help, not even to watch, really just to be part of whatever's happening in the calm hush of this late hour. He glances over, smirks faintly. Sharpening in the dark. That's either brave or stupid. You grin. Maybe both. He chuckles under his breath, but it's a soft sound, meant to stay low to the ground like the dying forge smoke. There's a peace here you didn't expect when the day began. Maybe it's the tiredness. Maybe it's the warmth. Maybe it's the way people who work hard all day run out of room for pretending. I sharpen better after sunset, Truth says. Something about the quiet. You can feel the edge better when there's nothing else competing for your ears. You focus,
And you can hear it too.
the faint scrape of metal against stone.
The occasional hiss of coal. Someone's low humming in the back could be a song, could be a spell, depending on who you ask. Triv lifts the blade up to the light.
The edge catches just enough flame to shimmer. This one's for someone important, he says. Another, Jarl. No, a grandmother. You blink. She's going to fight.
No, she just wanted her husband's old blade turned into a carving knife.
Said it still reminded her of him. Wanted to cut bread with it. You don't know what to say to that. But it sticks with you, the idea that steel could go from battle to breakfast.
That something meant to kill could one day just help butter warm rye. Blades change. He shrugs, as if reading your thoughts.
They're not just what they're forged for. They're what we ask of them outside. Snow begins to fall light and soundless. You notice it only because the faint coolness curls in through the stone gaps and brushes your skin. It smells faintly of pine and smoke.
You realize how strange it is to have spent a full day around fire and still feel a chill now. Einar, the elder smith, walks over and rests a hand on the doorframe.
Used to be. We believed every blade had a spirit, he says, half to the room.
Half to the air. Not a soul. Not like us, but a purpose.
Like a dog bred for hunting, you train it, feed it, praise it, but if it never gets to chase a deer, it sulks. Or bites. Triv adds, or bites. Einar agrees. Historians still debate whether Norse blacksmiths saw themselves more as artisans or as something closer to priest mediators between raw matter and meaningful tools. But to you, sitting here beside Triv and his near-finished blade, it doesn't feel like worship. It feels like listening. The steel doesn't talk. It waits. Sharpening in the dark makes you honest. Triv mutters.
You can't trust what you see, only what you feel.
The burrs.
The tiny pulls.
The balance. You think that's probably true of more things than blades. He finishes his last stroke and wipes the blade clean with a cloth that's seen 100. Such nights.
There's something ceremonial about it, though he'd never say so out loud. He stands, walks over to the rack, and sets it in place.
The row of weapons gleams quietly like a line of sleeping wolves. One by one, the others follow suit. Each blade is inspected, cleaned, stored.
Every movement is slower now, deliberate. Like brushing the hair of someone already half asleep. The forge doesn't shut down so much as it settles. A few coals still glow faintly.
Someone tosses a pine cone in for luck it sizzles softly. You gather your tools, stretch your legs. Everything aches, but in a good way. Even the tiredness is gentle like a long yawn stretched over your whole body. Before you leave, you glance back at the blades.
You can't help but wonder where they'll go, what hands will grip them, what moments they'll be part of.
Some might vanish in snow. Some might live on in sagas.
Others may wind up dull and forgotten in the back of a chest. But tonight, they're whole.
Waiting, sharpened in the dark.
The fire has faded now, a soft breath of amber coals beneath the stone.
The forge is nearly silent, save for the gentle creak of the wooden beam settling into sleep. Outside, the snow continues to fall, not the wild kind that howls against the roof, but the kind that hushes everything it touches. You step out into the cold. The air crisp against your skin, but not biting, just enough to remind you that you're alive, that you've made it through the long day. The blacksmiths are behind you now, already heading to their beds, or maybe just sitting by candlelight, nursing mugs of something warm and spiced. Their stories still echo in your ears, half real, half myth, all threaded with laughter and heat. You walk slowly, boots crunching softly on the frost-dusted path. The village is quiet, wrapped in night. The stars above scattered like tiny sparks twin to the ones that danced in the forge just hours ago.
You think of the blades resting on their racks,
Of runes carved into hilts, of the questions someone asked that no one quite answered. Do swords miss their owners? Maybe they do. Maybe everything forged with care remembers something. Your breath is slow now, your steps easy,
The cold doesn't chase you, it carries you gently.
like a whisper at your back. And as you reach your bed, warm blanket waiting, fire low in the hearth, the memory of the forge wraps itself around you. Not heavy, not loud, just steady, like a blade honed by quiet hands. Strong.
Familiar, you close your eyes.
Let the coals fade, let the snow fall, let the edge rest.